the Son of Man, which was one of Jesus' titles, came not to be served, but to serve. The drive from my house to this building is about 40 minutes, so every Sunday morning I have some time to think and wonder. And one of my routines is at 8 o'clock, I'm in my car somewhere in between my house and here. And I listen to the news at the top of the hour on NPR. And every time I do that, I think, one of the things I think to myself is, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? You know, one of the purposes of stained glass windows is, yes, they're beautiful, and all of those obvious reasons. And the other one, originally, way back when, not just this congregation, but any congregation has stained glass windows, part of the purpose is to keep that world out of here, at least for a little while. Keep the outside world out. We can't see it, so that we may go within. It takes at least an hour. As I mentioned earlier this morning, I love to call worship the most important hour of the week. It's an opportunity for us to go in and go deep, and then go out and have everybody serve us, right? No. So that we can ground ourselves and go out and serve. And in theory, the way this is supposed to work is by the time we get up Sunday morning, we're absolutely spiritually exhausted. And our loved ones ask us, you just had a good night's sleep. How can you be exhausted? I am so exhausted from spending my whole week serving others that I've got to go and worship so that I can again go deep. So as I was driving out here, I asked the question, and I've conditioned myself. I started doing it years ago. It's like, Groat, never ask a question of a congregation that you haven't already asked yourself. So I asked myself the question, in the coming days of this week, how may I serve others? I'm thinking about that. So I'm inviting you to think about it. Part of my job is to ask the right questions, and then you find your answers for them. So I'm going to ask you, how can you serve others in the specifics of your life this coming week? What we just heard read can probably be summed up this way. This is from one of my commentaries. Quote, only those willing to be slaves in the service of others have any claim to greatness. I'm going to say that again. Only those willing to be slaves in the service of others have any claim to greatness. This is an extreme statement. That dangerous word, slavery. Slave in the service of others. And by the way, this is an aside, but I can't resist it. James and John say, essentially, we want to sit at your right hand and your left hand, we want to be great. And Jesus says, wait a minute, guys. You need to think about what you're saying. Are you really willing to drink this cup? Put cup. They teach us in seminary during preaching class, never use the air quotes, so I'm going to use them. Cup. Are you really, you might want to think about this, because both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, whenever we mention cup, specifically in this instance, the cup in the New Testament, when Jesus says, are you willing to drink of this cup? The cup represents the passion of Christ, and the passion of Christ represents death, and then resurrection, but death. And I want you to know that in Acts, we're not sure about John. We've got James and John. We're not sure about John historically, but in Acts chapter 12, James is martyred. He got what he was asking for. And the great paradox of this passage is he didn't know what he was asking for. Only those willing to be slaves in the service of others have any claim to greatness. When I was a student at Mount Union College, which is now the University of Mount Union, we were, I'm sure it's not that way anymore, we were in trimesters. They called them trimesters. 3 trimesters throughout the academic year, which meant the whole time I was in college, I had from Thanksgiving to New Year's off. Can you imagine? It was fantastic. And my dad had a church member named Don Lowe, L-O-W-E. Don Lowe owned one of the 2 Sohio gas stations in town. Now, if you're, I don't know, 30 and younger, maybe 35, you have no idea what Sohio is, right? Well, there were 2 Sohio gas stations in town, and Don Lowe owned one of them. And my dad talked to Don Lowe and said, "Jay's got this pig going great. How about giving him a job?" So I worked for 4 winters pumping gas at Lowe's, Ohio. And Don was a real soft-spoken guy, so the first day on the job, I was a little taken aback. This real soft-spoken guy, went to church occasionally, great family. Don, this soft-spoken guy, first day on the job, he essentially said, "Jay, as long as you work here, you're going to be working the island." There was one island, which the island was where the gas pumps were. He said, "We're going to," essentially, the translation was, "We're going to be inside doing the hard stuff, working on cars. You're going to be out here pumping gas." And he got real assertive with me. It was a soft voice, but it was firm. And he said, "Jay, don't," I'm going to take myself even more. He said, "Don't ask if they need their oil checked. Just do it." This was long before self-serve, right? Don't ask them, do it. Don't ask to check their radiator, do it. Now listen to this one. Don't ask to check the water in their battery. Remember that? Just do it. And now you may ask them if they want you to check their tires. You can ask them. You don't have to do that, but ask them. Made such an impression on me. He said, "Don't ask, just do it. Serve aggressively." Only those willing to be slaves in the service of others have any claim to greatness. I'm so, well, let me read this. Everybody's heard of Mother Teresa, right? Mother Teresa. Let me read this one short paragraph. Mother Teresa founded the Missionaries of Charity, a religious congregation that was initially dedicated to serving the poorest of the poor in the slums of Calcutta. Over the decades, the congregation grew to operate in over 133 countries, and as of 2012, with more than 4,500 nuns, managing homes for those dying from HIV/AIDS, leprosy, and tuberculosis, as well as running soup kitchens, dispensaries, mobile clinics, orphanages, and schools. On and on it goes. Years ago, many years ago, in the congregation that I was serving, one of our church members actually went. They were traveling in India and environs, and Tom and his wife actually went. They wanted to meet Mother Teresa. They wanted to meet Mother Teresa, and I'll tell you why I'm chuckling. So they did. And then they came back, and I was really anxious to hear. I said, Tom, what was it like? Did you get to meet Mother Teresa? And he kind of hemmed and hawed, and he said, yeah, we met her. And I'm like, what? He said, she was kind of nasty. She didn't want to talk to us. I said, how come? He's like, she was busy. This guy goes halfway around the world. He wants to have a chat with Mother Teresa. She's too busy serving others. It's hilarious. He was sort of miffed. I just said, Tom. Okay, I'm going to wind this up. I'm going to say this once more. Only those willing to be slaves in the service of others have any claim to greatness. How can you and I, this week, in the specifics of our lives, how can we serve others? Now, I tell a lot of stories about my dad because he was a great influence on my life. And so, therefore, I'm going to tell you another one. We lived on 733 West 5th Street. Marysville was still a small town. And on both sides of our houses were widows. I used to, in my mind, call them old widows. Now I call them older widows. They both lived alone. And the first winter that we lived in that house, the first significant snow we got, my dad pulled me and my older brother Jeff aside. And this is how we were raised. He said, sit down, I want to have a Bible study with you. I want to read to you from Mark. And I want to read to you about... No, he didn't do that. He didn't do that, but here's what he did. He handed us each a snow shovel. And he said, Jeff, I want you to do Mrs. So-and-so. And Jay, I want you to do Mrs. So-and-so. I want you to shovel their front walks, and I want you to shovel their sidewalks up to their porch. I want you to shovel off an area on their front porches so that they can get in and out. And I don't want you to ask them. Just do it. So we did. And the first time I did it, the woman that I did, excuse me, she had the wonderful name of Mrs. Bump. Honest to God, Mrs. Bump. Sounds like something from a Dickens novel, doesn't it? Mrs. Bump. And, I was a typical kid, and I was, shoveling, and I got closer to her front door, and I thought, Mrs. Bump was fine. I really don't want to see her. I don't want to have any conversation. So I'm shoveling because, and my dad asks us who I'm shoveling, and I look, and there's a curtain, and she moves the curtain, she looks out, and she looks at me. No expression, one way or the other. Okay. And so she knew my name, and I finished on the porch, and I turned to leave, and I heard the door open, and she said, Jay. And I said, yes. She said, come here. And I said, okay. And she handed me $5 and shut the door, and I walked away. Now, what I found out years later when I told my brother, Jeff, this, Jeff was smart enough to keep his mouth shut, and he kept the $5 that he got. But I'm not that smart. And I went back, and I told my dad. I said, Dad, look, I got $5. And he smiled at me, and what did he say? Take it back. I took it back, and I was so glad that he told me to. And later on in high school, when I wanted to go out on a date, my dad told me, he said, I love it that you play 3 sports a year in high school. You don't have a job. He said, anytime you need any money, you just come to me. Only those willing to be slaves in the service of others have any claim to greatness. Amen?